When the board laughed and called me an intern, I smiled and took notes. They didn't know I was observing for the company's largest shareholder, my grandmother. For 18 months I watched arrogance replace oversight, jokes replace governance, and side deals replace duty. When she passed, they assumed her influence died too. They were wrong. I quietly called a special shareholders meeting, distributed binders of their own emails, and let the facts speak. By the end of the day, laughter vanished, votes flipped, and careers ended. Underestimation gave me access. Patience gave me power. Silence became my sharpest, final instrument. My name is Lauren Whitaker, and the first time the board laughed at me, I learned exactly how invisible competence can be when wrapped in the wrong title, because I wasn't technically wrong when they called me an intern, just incomplete, since my badge said temporary analyst and my desk sat outside the executive floor, and I fetched coffee more often than credit for ideas. But what they didn't know, or didn't care to ask, was that I was there at the direct invitation of the company's largest silent shareholder, my grandmother, who believed observation revealed more truth than confrontation, and she wanted eyes inside a board that had grown lazy, insulated, and cruelly self-satisfied, and so I listened while men twice my age joked about kids these days, while they mispronounced my name, interrupted my reports, and once asked if I was lost when I entered the boardroom with documents they'd requested, and every slight lodged itself neatly into memory, not as resentment, but as data. Because patterns matter more than moments, and over 18 months I cataloged everything, executive overrides, side deals, compensation irregularities, and the casual way fiduciary duty was treated like a suggestion instead of law, and when I flagged risks politely they smiled indulgently, told me I was eager, and moved on, assuming eagerness fades when ignored, but silence sharpened my focus, and while they dismissed me, I learned the company better than any of them, because interns don't threaten, they observe, and observation gave me leverage, and when my grandmother passed unexpectedly, the condolences came with assumptions, that her influence died with her, that her granddaughter would disappear quietly, and that the board would continue unchanged. But they hadn't read the trust documents closely, because grief doesn't negate preparation, and she had transferred her voting power to me months earlier, conditional only on my discretion, and I honored that condition by waiting. Watching them grow bolder, approving riskier maneuvers, mocking oversight openly, and when one director joked during a meeting that even the intern knows better, gesturing at me as the room laughed, something crystallized, not anger, but timing, because power isn't seized, it's revealed. And 2 weeks later I exercised my right to call a special shareholders meeting, a move so unexpected it triggered confusion, frantic emails, and legal consultations that all ended the same way, confirming I had full authority, and when the meeting convened, the board arrived confident, smug even, expecting a symbolic gesture, maybe a speech about transparency, but instead they were handed binders, thick, indexed, and annotated, containing 18 months of documented violations, emails, approvals, and financial exposure, and I spoke once, briefly, outlining the contents and recommending immediate action to protect shareholder value, and the room fell silent in a way laughter never could, because facts have weight, and as questions flew, the narrative collapsed under scrutiny, because they couldn't deny their own signatures, timestamps, and recorded votes, and by the end of the meeting, motions had passed removing 3 directors, suspending 2 more pending investigation, and initiating external audits that would later end their careers quietly but completely, and afterward, as people filed out avoiding my eyes, one former director muttered that I'd tricked them, as if competence hiding behind humility were deception, and I corrected him gently, saying no one had been tricked, they'd simply underestimated someone who listened, and when the press eventually framed it as a shocking intern uprising, I didn't correct them publicly, because simplification protects egos. And in the weeks that followed I assumed an interim leadership role not because I wanted power, but because stability required someone who understood the mess, and employees who had once overlooked me began asking thoughtful questions, realizing I had always been there, always paying attention, and the irony wasn't lost on me that the same people who dismissed me for my title had handed me the blueprint to their own removal, because arrogance creates blind spots, and blind spots invite collapse. And when a journalist later asked how it felt to end careers that mocked me, I said it wasn't about revenge, because revenge implies emotion, and this had been procedural, necessary, and overdue, and the Lesson my grandmother wanted taught was never about humiliation, but accountability, that organizations rot when leaders forget their stewards, not owners, and that power ignoring humility eventually answers to it. And years later, when I pass interns in the hallway, I make a point of listening, because titles expire, arrogance multiplies, and the quietest people in the room are often the ones deciding when the meeting will end.